What's up, guys? Are you dizzy, anxious, or off balance? Here's why. Hey, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Rachel Graham. I'm a digital creator, a registered nurse, and a mom. And today we're diving into a topic that affects more people than you would think. It actually affected me, vertigo, and how this connects to stress and anxiety. So, have you ever felt like the room was spinning, or if you're standing and you just kind of feel like you're swaying? I mean, that sensation is really terrifying, and it could be vertigo. And guess what? Stress and anxiety can make it even worse, or they can actually trigger it, which is pretty crazy to think about. So let's break it all down. Let's talk about what you can do to feel more grounded, literally and emotionally. All right, you guys? So to start off, I'd like to get back to the basics. So what is vertigo? So it isn't a disease, it's actually a symptom, and it's often described as a spinning sensation, like you or your surroundings are moving when they're not. And if you've never experienced this, I pray that you never have to. It is probably one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced, and it's commonly caused by inner ear issues. So that's like benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, or BPPV, vestibular migraines, or inner ear infections. But here's the twist. Stress and anxiety can actually worsen vertigo, and it can sometimes even mimic it. So before I jump in too deep, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over the structure of the ear, because the ear is a super fascinating structure. So it obviously controls hearing and equilibrium, or the auditory and vestibular systems. It's organized into 3 different parts. So you have the external, the middle, and the internal. And I have this really cool diagram here. So the outer ear, or the external ear, is collecting the sound. And you can see this is this pink part right here, okay? And it's called the auricle, or the pinna. It collects these sound waves from the environment. These sound waves travel down a small tunnel called the ear canal. So you can see this is the yellow part here. And at the end of the canal is the eardrum, or the tympanic membrane. And you can see that right here. So this is what vibrates when sound hits it. So that's super fascinating in and of itself. And then we have the middle ear. So this is what amplifies the sound. It's behind the eardrum, and it contains 3 tiny bones. And I'm gonna put this really close. So it contains the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. So it's the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Those are the medical terms. So these tiny little bones in here, they vibrate with the eardrum, and they help amplify the sound and pass it along to the inner ear. So there's a small tube called the eustachian tube that connects the middle ear to your nose and throat, and that actually helps equalize pressure. So when your ears pop when you're on a like a plane. So the inner ear is what turns vibration into electrical signals, and the inner ear is deep inside your skull. It's carved into bone, and it's shaped like a snail. That's it right there. It's called the cochlea. And this is so cool. It's filled with special fluids called the perilymph and the endolymph, which is the outer and inner fluid, and those are depicted right here. Inside the cochlea is a structure called the organ of Corti, which is lined with tiny little hairs. So down here you can see the hairs. As the sound moves through, the vibrations move through the fluid, these little hairs actually bend, and they send electrical signals to the brain, which travel through the auditory nerve, otherwise the 8th cranial nerve, to your brain where you hear the sound. So here is where that's connected to the hair cells and traveling to your brain. So the stress, anxiety, vertigo loop. So let's talk about this loop. So stress and anxiety activate your fight or flight response. That activates your nervous system, your heart rate, and even your inner ear function. So you feel off balance and dizzy, which makes you more anxious, which makes symptoms really a lot worse. So if this sounds familiar, this is not just like a biological loop. It's actually not just in your head, and understanding that is the first step in figuring out how do you deal with this situation. So we have to address what is chronic stress. And we all know, like, yeah, I'm feeling stressed, this is really stressful, but chronic stress is when you've got long-term ongoing stress that doesn't go away. So certain events, we're always going to have stress in our modern lives, right? Like being late for a meeting, or like you get a text that's like not very good, you feel stressed, or we're not talking about that. We're talking about persistent feelings of like a heavy tension over days, weeks, months. And so this is when your body is staying in a fight or flight mode for way longer than it's supposed to. So what would be some examples of some ongoing stress? So that would be like, you really dislike your job, you're super burnt out, but you kind of have to keep going because you need to make money for your family, or you have a lot of financial problems, you have a lot of debt, or your mom is really sick and you're the only caregiver, you're in an abusive relationship, potentially you are having insomnia, you're not able to sleep, or you've had a lot of like trauma and you have not processed that. You're in the grieving process, things like this. These are long-term stressors. So how chronic stress, how does it keep vertigo happening? So basically what chronic stress is doing in our bodies is it's activating our sympathetic nervous system. So our body is in this constant state of alertness. This increases muscle tension. You know, you can feel that in your neck, in your back, and shoulders. This can affect blood flow. This can affect balance. Stress chemicals, we've all heard of it, cortisol, can actually disrupt the inner ear function. Oh my gosh, there's a fly. And it can worsen inflammation. And then chronic anxiety, that can lead to this like hyper awareness of body sensations. So it can make what might be just a mild dizziness feel very, very intense. So your balance system, composed of your ears, your eyes, and your muscles, it needs calm in order to reset. So if you're chronically stressed out, what it forces this to stay in this very disorganized state, and this vertigo continues on. So the feedback loop is you feel dizzy, you get anxious, dizziness worsens, more stress. You can see how that's going. So what can you do? Here's what helps. Breathe to ground your nervous system. So if you inhale for 4 seconds, let's do this. Hold for 4, exhale for 6. If you repeat this for 2 to 3 minutes, it actually sends a signal to your brain, we're safe. Try that out. Hydration and nourish yourself. A story I just heard about somebody that was super dehydrated and experienced extreme vertigo. Low blood sugar can also mimic or worsen vertigo. So you need to make sure you're drinking your weight in ounces of water every single day, you guys. You need to eat small balanced meals, high in protein and healthy fats, and some gentle movement. Even if you're feeling super off balance, movement can help sort of recalibrate that vestibular system. So you can actually start with like slow head movements, or like a Tai Chi sort of like fluid movement like that, or yoga, simply getting outside and walking in nature, and then reducing stimuli. So get off your phone, avoid screens, avoid watching TV, avoid loud environments when you're having these sort of flare-ups. And then when you're going to sleep, make sure you're resting, or if you're napping and it's calm and it's a dark space. So say you're doing some of these things and your vertigo, like I would always recommend you go see your provider, but say you have to wait to get in. So you can practice those things. So now you've gotten into your provider. So what are they gonna say to you? What are they gonna ask you? So they're gonna say like, what does it feel like? Can you explain your symptoms? And this is where it's helpful to have notes in your phone. Like, yeah, I'm lightheaded, I feel like off balance, the room's spinning. They're gonna ask you, when did it start? How long does it last? And what triggers it? Is it when you're lying down to getting up? Are you stressed out? They're gonna ask about if you have ringing in your ears, any nausea or vision problems. They're gonna ask about recent infections, head injuries, or any new meds that you're on. They're gonna ask if you feel anxious or panicked during these episodes. Then they're gonna do a standard physical exam. So they're gonna check your vitals, blood pressure, heart rate, lying and standing. That talks about, it's called orthostatic hypotension. So it rules out like, does your blood pressure shift? Does it drop when you go from these changes in position? They're gonna look at your ears for signs of infection. They're gonna check for fluid in there. They're gonna do a neurological exam, so checking your eye movement and balance with the little light. They're gonna check coordination, reflexes. They may actually get you to walk, and they're gonna check out your gait and your posture. And then they do some special tests for vertigo. So those can be some positional tests like the Dix-Hallpike test, and that's when you sit and then lie back quickly with your head turned, and they're gonna watch your eyes for any abnormal movement called nystagmus. So this is gonna help diagnose the BPPV I mentioned earlier, which is the benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. So this is a super common inner ear issue. They may also do the head impulse test, where you look at the doctor's nose and then they're gonna move your head quickly side to side. I remember they did this on me. And then they're gonna check your inner ear's reflex pathways. So they may order some additional tests as well as that, and depending on what they see and what your symptoms are, they might send you for other tests like hearing tests, balance tests, or specific imaging like MRI or CT scan if they're related or worried about anything brain related like tumors. They will probably also draw some labs, do some blood work, and that's gonna be able to, they're gonna look for infections, anemia, low blood sugars in that lab work. And if your doctor isn't ordering labs, I would highly recommend you ask for lab work to be done. So then what happens after they've assessed you? Well, they're gonna hopefully find a clear cause of what's triggering this. And as I said a few times, BPPV. So if that is the case, there's a repositioning treatment called the Epley maneuver, and they can actually do that right in the office. If it's an inner ear infection like labyrinthitis or a vestibular neuritis, you may get an anti-nausea med, you may get a steroid, and you may be referred to vestibular rehab. If the cause that they found is migraines, then you may be evaluated for like a vestibular migraine, and treatment could include like migraine medications and some lifestyle change. If they find it's anxiety or stress-induced vertigo, they might refer you to therapy. They may recommend stress management. I talked about a few of those techniques. And they may provide short-term medication. So I'll tell you a little bit about my personal story as we get to the end of this video. But if the cause isn't clear, they may refer you to a specialist like an ear, nose, and throat doctor or a neurologist to really be able to zero in and gather some more data that they're just not able to do as the regular provider. There's also the vestibular rehab therapy, or VRT. So if your vertigo is persistent, definitely ask the provider about VRT. So essentially it's like physical therapy, but it's for your balance system, and it can be really, really awesome. And then, part of this whole process, as you're going through this process, to try journaling, try talk therapy, coaching, try meditation, prayer, digital detoxing. I'm going to be actually doing a video on this topic, so you can check out my channel for that. Limiting caffeine and alcohol is really important too, because those two things trigger anxiety. So these tools don't just help you cope, they actually help rewire your nervous system, and they offer you long-term relief from some of these symptoms. So if you have found yourself stuck in this cycle of dizziness and stress and anxiety, and it just feels like, oh my gosh, this is the scariest thing I've ever experienced, know that you're not alone, and there is a way out, you guys. So start again with the basics. So that's breathing, moving, hydrating, rest, and reset. So I said at the end of the video that I wanted to share a little bit about my personal story with vertigo, and I'd like to do that. So my grandparents, I was very, very close with them growing up, and my grandfather, I got a call that my grandfather was taken to the hospital, and it appeared that he had had a stroke, and he was pretty old at this point. So, if you have grandparents, that it's coming. We don't all live forever. You know that they're going to pass, and you try to prepare for it, but nothing really prepares you for the moment, right? So I was living here in the United States, and my grandparents live in Canada, and I got on a plane pretty much immediately when I heard that it was like he wasn't responsive in the hospital, and got to the hospital, and yeah, he wasn't responsive. And that night I felt this need to just stay there overnight. It was about a 30-minute drive from the hospital to where my grandparents lived, and I could have just gone home. My grandma went home, but I just said to the nurse, I just feel like I really need to stay here. And she brought me a cot into the room, and I remember going to sleep, and I woke up and I heard the agonal breaths. And I wasn't a nurse at this point, but the sound of somebody who's taking their last breaths. It's like, it's a sound like no other. So I go over to him, and I remember holding his hands and just looking at him and talking to him. And it was just like, I don't even know how much time had elapsed. I feel like it wasn't very much. I literally was there with him as he took his last breaths and he stopped breathing. And at that point, I remember screaming for the nurse, like, "Nurse, hurry, hurry, hurry." And they ran in, and I was like, he's not breathing, like help him. And they were like, he's a DNR, like that means do not resuscitate. Like he chose that if this happened, we are not to resuscitate him. And like, you know what a DNR is, but when you get to that moment with your loved one and it's like, what do you mean you're not gonna resuscitate him? I remember begging the nurses like, please help him, he help him. And they were like, I'm sorry, we can't. Like, he has a DNR, like, and they just comforted me. And I remember just like, oh my God, it could bring me to tears right now thinking about it, you guys. And I'm wearing my Canadian hat for my grandparents. But yeah, so it was really, 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 really hard. And then having to like, I don't remember if I called my grandma or the nurses did, probably both. And then my grandma coming there and it was like, he had already died, right? And I was there and it was just like really intense to see my grandma like with my grandpa when he had just passed. So I tell you all this because after that, I had to go back home because I was in school and I needed to go back to my job. And I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't take a lot of time off to be with my grandma. I might have been there for like literally a day. Like that's it. I swear to God, it was like 2 days maybe. So anyways, I flew back to Madison and the flight coming in, this is kind of relevant because I initially thought this could have triggered it, but the flight coming in was really choppy. There was a lot of turbulence. It was really scary. I remember like grabbing the lady next to me, her like leg. I just like grabbed it and squeezed. And I remember her looking at me and I was like, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm really scared right now. Like there's a lot of turbulence and like, no, turbulent, I can't. Like, no. Anyways, so shortly after getting home, I woke up and I had vertigo. I didn't really know that's what it was, but I had dizziness. And the dizziness persisted. It didn't stop. It was like all day long. And at first I was like, okay, like, was it I started Googling, right? What causes vertigo? And it's like, people would say like cruise ships or airplanes, like post, right after you've been on a cruise, you could have the sensation of movement, right? So I'm like, okay, maybe it was the turbulence on the airplane. Had to be it. It went on for weeks, you guys. And I would literally wake up and I would be like, maybe it'll be gone. And I remember like putting my feet on the ground and standing up and then being like, it's not gone. And like literally being just distraught. And I was working as a waitress at the time and I had to walk around at my job, like, in between tables, I had to walk. And I remember I worked at a steakhouse and I would like steady myself on the booths. There was like this narrow pathway in this one part of the restaurant and I would have to like hold on to the booths. And it felt like I was in like a fun house where the floor was moving and the room was like shifting. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life. Like so freaking scary. So I literally went to probably, I wanna say like 4 or 5 different doctors. They looked at all the things that I shared with you. They looked in my ears, they did all the tests and they were like, there's nothing wrong with your ears. Like you don't have any of these things. There was no diagnoses. And they told me to take Gravol, or I don't know what that is here. In Canada, it's Gravol. It's like an anti-nausea, anti-dizziness, basically. So I tried that, didn't do anything. And I started to feel like, do I have Meniere's disease? Like, is this ever going away? Or is this like a new thing I'm just gonna have to live with for the rest of my life? I finally saw, she was a nurse practitioner, and I'll never forget this for the rest of my life. And her name was Linda Lenz. Shout out Linda Lenz if you're listening to this in Madison, Wisconsin. I told her everything that had happened, and she said, has anything, happened, has there been anything traumatic that's happened in your life? And I was like, yeah, there has. Like, my grandpa died. And she was like, that's it. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, grief can manifest in your body as like a real somatic physical response. And she's like, I'm gonna prescribe you a couple of days of Valium, lorazepam, and you're gonna be okay. Because it's gonna just kind of regulate things. It's just gonna take the edge off that extreme stress, grief, stress, this chronic state. Even if, and I said to her, but I don't, my grandpa was old. I was there with him. It was it was actually the best way you could go. Like, I don't feel like I'm not crying every day. Like, I don't know if I'm intensely grieving him to the point where I should be having this physical response. She said, it doesn't matter what you think about grief. This is how your body is responding to grief. You may not be cognitively aware of this, but this is guarantee what's going on with you, because your inner ears, everything's fine. I kid you not, you guys, I took that pill. It was like within hours, the vertigo was gone. And I'm not diagnosing you. I'm not a doctor. This was my personal experience with grief and extreme stress. Grief, extreme stress, same, one and the same. And that this, after all other things had been ruled out, this is what she prescribed me, and this is what worked for me. Crazy story, but that's my experience with it. So I felt really compelled to make a video on this topic, and now we're at over 20 minutes, and this is my longest video that I've recorded. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you guys did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your stories. Have you ever had vertigo? And if so, what was the cause of it? What was your experience? And I'll see you in the next one, guys. All right, bye.